Senator James Whitfield stepped out of his sleek black SUV and straightened his expensive blue tie. At 52, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who rarely heard the word no. The autumn sun caught his silver-streaked hair as cameras flashed around him. This was his third term representing his state, and everyone knew he had his eyes set on something bigger. Senator Whitfield, what's your response to the new police funding bill? A reporter called out. James flashed his practiced smile. We need accountability, not more blank checks. My constituents deserve better than throwing money at a broken system. His assistant, Melissa, hurried alongside him, clutching a tablet with a schedule. She'd been with him for 8 months, longer than most staff managed to last. The turnover in Whitfield's office was legendary among political circles. You had the donors meeting at 3, and the television interview at 5. She reminded him quietly as they entered the government building. Move the donors to 4. I need time to review talking points for the interview, he said without looking at her. And get me coffee. The good stuff from that place on the corner, not the garbage from the break room. Melissa nodded and stepped away to make the changes. The senator had a reputation for being demanding, but his public image remained polished and appealing to voters. His campaign had carefully crafted his image as a tough-talking reformer who wouldn't bow to special interests. Behind closed doors, Whitfield's true character was well known to his staff. The senator's chief of staff, Robert, had mastered the art of damage control during Whitfield's 6 years in office. As the inner circle gathered in the senator's private office that afternoon, the tension was visible on everyone's faces. The police union is pushing back hard on your statements from last week, Robert explained, sliding a report across the polished desk. They're calling it inflammatory. Whitfield scoffed. They always say that. People love a politician who speaks his mind these days. My numbers went up 3 points after that press conference. Robert exchanged glances with the communications director. Yes, but we need to be careful about. Careful is what got the last guy voted out. Whitfield interrupted, leaning back in his leather chair. People are tired of politicians who tiptoe around. They want someone real. What his voters didn't see were moments like what happened next, when a young black intern accidentally knocked over a glass of water while distributing documents. Whitfield's reaction was immediate and harsh. Are you serious? He snapped, standing up as water dripped from the table. Is this the best they could send us? Get someone competent in here. The intern apologized profusely, face burning with humiliation as he quickly mopped up the spill. Robert intervened smoothly, dismissing the young man with a quiet word of reassurance. When the door closed, Robert turned to the senator. James, we talked about this, the staff. The staff needs to do their jobs. Whitfield cut him off. I'm not running a charity here. Later that evening, at a private fundraising dinner, Whitfield was in his element. Surrounded by wealthy supporters at an exclusive restaurant, he spoke passionately about his vision for the future. His charm was turned up to maximum, each donor made to feel special and valued. The problem with law enforcement today, he said between sips of 18-year-old scotch, is that they've forgotten who they work for. They answer to the citizens, not the other way around. The table nodded in agreement, checkbooks ready. This was the public Whitfield, confident, outspoken, and seemingly principled. Only his driver, waiting patiently outside, had seen how the senator had spoken to the restaurant's black valet who had accidentally scratched his car door earlier. The words he'd used would never make it into any campaign speech. As the event wrapped up, Whitfield's phone buzzed with a message from his campaign manager. His latest speech had gone viral, with over 200,000 views in just hours. Comments praised his straight talk and refreshing honesty. See, Whitfield said to Robert as they climbed into the car. People are tired of political correctness. They want someone who tells it like it is. Robert nodded noncommittally, making notes for tomorrow's agenda. The polls didn't lie. Whitfield's star was indeed rising. Despite the high staff turnover and the whispered stories about his behavior, voters were responding to his message. What Senator James Whitfield didn't realize was that his carefully constructed image was built on shifting sand. And sometimes, all it took was one unexpected encounter to bring even the mightiest castles crashing down. Senator James Whitfield glanced at his watch and frowned. The digital display read 7:42 p.m. He was already running late for the biggest fundraiser of his campaign, where at least 50 major donors would be waiting. His grip tightened on the steering wheel of his Mercedes as he pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb past 65 in a 45 miles per hour zone. These damn local roads, he muttered to himself, reaching for his phone as it buzzed with another message from his campaign manager. The evening sun cast long shadows across the road as Whitfield sped through the suburbs. His mind raced with the speech he prepared, mentally rehearsing lines that would appeal to the wealthy crowd waiting at the country club. He barely noticed when he blew through a yellow light that quickly turned red. What he did notice was the sudden flash of blue and red lights in his rearview mirror. "You've got to be kidding me," Whitfield hissed, slapping the steering wheel. "Not now." The police cruiser followed closely behind, siren giving a short wail to signal him to pull over. For a brief moment, Whitfield considered ignoring it. He was a senator, after all, but reluctantly eased his luxury car to the side of the road. "This better be quick," he said, reaching for his wallet. He already had his business card with his Senate seal ready to hand over. It had gotten him out of tickets before. In his side mirror, Whitfield watched as a tall officer stepped out of the patrol car. The policeman adjusted his hat and approached with measured steps, flashlight in hand despite the lingering daylight. As the officer drew closer, Whitfield's expression darkened. The cop was black. Officer Marcus Johnson had been on the force for 15 years. At 42, he'd seen it all: drunk drivers, speeders, people with every excuse in the book. He approached the Mercedes with the same professional caution he showed on every stop. "Good evening, sir," Officer Johnson said, his voice calm and official. "I'm Officer Johnson with the Metro Police Department. License and registration, please." Whitfield looked up with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Do you know who I am, officer?" Johnson's face remained neutral. "I need to see your license and registration, sir." "I'm Senator James Whitfield," he said, emphasizing each word. "I'm late for an important event. Surely we can handle this another way." He held out his Senate business card instead of his driver's license. Officer Johnson glanced at the card but didn't take it. "That's fine, Senator, but I still need to see your license and registration. You were going 20 miles over the speed limit and ran a red light." Whitfield's fake smile vanished. "Look, I'm running this state while you're out here harassing law-abiding citizens. Just take the card, write down who I am, and we can both be on our way." "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to provide your license and registration," Johnson said, his tone still professional but firmer. Something in Whitfield snapped. The stress of being late, the frustration of being pulled over, and the audacity of this officer not immediately backing down all converged in a moment of ugly truth. "Listen here," Whitfield lowered his voice, leaning out the window. "I sit on the committee that controls your department's budget. Do you understand what that means? I can make things very difficult for people who don't know their place." Officer Johnson stepped back slightly, his hand moving to rest near his body camera. "Sir, I need you to calm down." "Calm down," Whitfield's voice rose. "Who do you think you're talking to? Do you know how many cops I could have fired with one phone call?" What neither of them noticed was a young woman who had pulled over across the street. Concerned about the escalating situation, she had taken out her phone and begun recording. "Sir, please step out of the vehicle," Officer Johnson said, his training kicking in as the situation deteriorated. "I'm not going anywhere," Whitfield snarled, then added under his breath, loud enough to be heard, "This is why you people shouldn't be given badges." Officer Johnson's expression didn't change, though something flickered in his eyes. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one final time to step out of the vehicle and provide your identification." Across the street, the young woman, Jessica Martinez, continued recording. A journalism student at the local university, she had been taught to document potential abuses of power. She never expected to capture a state senator in the middle of what was quickly becoming a career-defining meltdown. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Whitfield said, his carefully maintained public persona crumbling by the second. "When I'm done with you, you'll be lucky to find work as a mall cop." The confrontation was just beginning, and neither man realized that every word was being recorded for the world to hear. Officer Marcus Johnson maintained his composure despite the senator's growing hostility. 15 years on the force had taught him how to handle difficult people, though few were as openly disrespectful as the man before him now. "Sir, "This is a routine traffic stop," Johnson explained calmly. "I need to see your license and registration like I would ask of any citizen." Senator Whitfield's face reddened as he gripped his steering wheel tighter. "And I'm telling you, I don't have time for this nonsense. Do you have any idea what I'm late for? People who actually matter are waiting for me." Across the street, Jessica Martinez adjusted her position to get a better angle with her phone camera. The evening light was fading, but the confrontation was clearly visible. She could see the officer's patient stance and the animated gestures of the driver through the car window. "Sir, refusing to provide identification during a traffic stop is against the law," Officer Johnson said, "even for a senator." "Is that a threat?" Whitfield snapped, his voice rising. "You're threatening me now." Johnson shook his head slightly. "No, sir, just stating the law. Now, I'll ask you again to provide your license and registration." Instead of complying, Whitfield reached for his phone. "That's it. I'm calling your chief. What's your badge number?" Officer Johnson recited his badge number clearly, unfazed by the threat. "While you're making that call, I still need to see your license and registration." The senator's patience finally broke. He threw his door open, nearly hitting Johnson, and stepped out of the car. At 6 feet tall, he tried to use his height to intimidate the officer, who stood calmly, one hand now resting cautiously on his belt. "You people are all the same," Whitfield hissed, his voice low but clear in the evening quiet. "Got a little badge and think you can push around important people. This is exactly why your kind shouldn't be given any authority." Jessica gasped softly from her hidden position, shocked by the senator's words. Her hand trembled slightly, but she kept recording. Officer Johnson's face remained professional, though a muscle in his jaw tightened. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step back and lower your voice." "Or what?" Whitfield challenged, stepping closer. "You gonna shoot me? Make up some story about feeling threatened. That would really work out for you, wouldn't it?" A small crowd had begun to gather at the gas station nearby, watching the scene unfold. Two men stepped closer, concerned about the officer's safety. "Last chance, Senator," Johnson said firmly. "License and registration, or I'll have to place you under arrest for failure to comply with a lawful order." Whitfield laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You have no idea what you've just done to your career. When I'm finished with you, you'll be directing traffic at school crossings, if you're lucky." He reached into his pocket, and Johnson tensed momentarily until Whitfield pulled out his wallet and threw his driver's license on the ground. "Happy now? Pick it up," the senator demanded. Officer Johnson looked at the license on the pavement and then back at Whitfield. "Please pick up your license and hand it to me properly, sir." "I said pick it up," Whitfield shouted, loud enough that several more onlookers turned their heads. Johnson removed his handcuffs from his belt. "Senator Whitfield, you're under arrest for obstruction and failure to comply with a lawful order." "Don't you dare touch me," Whitfield snarled, backing up against his car. "Do you know what happens to cops who arrest senators, especially cops like you?" "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Johnson instructed, his voice steady despite the slurs now flowing freely from the senator's mouth. From her position across the street, Jessica couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The man she had seen on television speaking about unity and justice was now spewing hatred that contradicted everything his campaign claimed to stand for. As Officer Johnson moved forward to place the handcuffs on the still resistant senator, Whitfield made his biggest mistake yet. "Get your hands off me, you." What followed was a stream of racial slurs so vile that several bystanders audibly gasped. The words hung in the air like poison, captured perfectly on Jessica's phone and on Officer Johnson's body camera. In that moment, Senator James Whitfield had revealed his true self to the world, unaware that his political career was already beginning to crumble. Jessica Martinez's hands trembled as she finished recording the shocking confrontation. She looked down at her phone, hardly believing what she had captured. The respected state senator had just revealed his true character in the most public way possible, and she had it all on video. "Should I really post this?" she whispered to herself, watching as Officer Johnson professionally handcuffed the still ranting Senator Whitfield. The politician continued to hurl insults and threats, even as he was guided toward the police cruiser. After a moment's hesitation, Jessica made her decision. She opened her social media account and uploaded the 3-minute video with a simple caption. State Senator James Whitfield during traffic stop this evening. No edits. Within minutes, her phone began buzzing with notifications. Friends sharing, strangers commenting, messages flooding in. Jessica had never seen anything spread so quickly. By the time she arrived home 20 minutes later, the video had already been viewed over 5,000 times. This can't be real, wrote one commenter. Is that really Senator Whitfield? Asked another. Always knew he was fake, declared a third. Meanwhile, at the police station, Officer Johnson was processing the senator's paperwork with the same calm professionalism he'd shown during the arrest. Whitfield sat seething in a holding cell, demanding his phone call. My lawyer will have your badge, he threatened as Johnson walked past. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Johnson said nothing, continuing with his work. After 15 years on the force, he'd heard it all before. What he didn't know was that his body camera footage had already been requested by his captain, who had received calls from 3 different news outlets. By midnight, Jessica's video had been viewed over 100,000 times and had been picked up by local news stations. By 6 a.m., it was playing on national morning shows. In shocking footage captured last night, Senator James Whitfield, who has positioned himself as a champion of police reform, can be heard using racial slurs during a routine traffic stop, announced a somber news anchor. Viewer discretion is advised. In the Whitfield campaign headquarters, chaos reigned. Phones rang constantly. Staff members huddled around computer screens, watching in horror as their candidate's true character was exposed to the world. Robert, the chief of staff, paced the floor, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, Senator, I understand you're upset, but we need to craft a response immediately. This is already everywhere. On the other end, Whitfield, released on bail just hours earlier, was furious. It's been edited. They're trying to frame me. That officer set me up. The footage is continuous, James, Robert replied quietly. From both the civilian video and the officer's body camera. There's no edit. Online, people were already digging deeper. News outlets pulled up Officer Marcus Johnson's service record. 15 years without a single complaint, commendations for bravery, community service awards. Photos emerged of him coaching youth basketball and volunteering at senior centers. In contrast, reporters began investigating Senator Whitfield's past. Former staffers, previously silent about their experiences, now felt emboldened to speak out. He always had 2 faces, said one anonymous ex-employee. What you saw in that video is the real James Whitfield. We saw it every day. By noon, the video had reached millions of views. Political commentators dissected every moment. Body language experts noted the officer's restraint and the senator's aggressive posture. Social media users created memes and parodies that spread even further than the original video. Officer Johnson, despite his sudden fame, reported for his regular shift that day. His colleagues offered support, but he maintained his characteristic humility. I was just doing my job, he told a fellow officer who congratulated him. Like I do every day. At home that evening, Officer Johnson's wife Tanya held his hand as they watched the news together. His phone continued to ring with interview requests, which he declined. Are you okay? She asked softly, seeing the weight of attention on his shoulders. Johnson nodded slowly. Just didn't expect to become the center of a national story by writing a speeding ticket. As the day ended, Senator Whitfield remained sequestered in his home, ignoring calls from party leaders and donors. His carefully constructed image had shattered in less than 24 hours. What neither Officer Johnson nor Senator Whitfield realized was that this was only the beginning. The video had awakened something in the public consciousness, and the story was far from over. The truth, so long hidden behind carefully crafted speeches and polished appearances, was finally coming to light. Senator James Whitfield stared at the television in his living room, watching his own face contort with anger on the screen for what felt like the 100th time. 3 days had passed since the traffic stop, and the story showed no signs of fading away. If anything, it was growing bigger. Turn it off, he snapped at his wife, who silently pressed the remote. The sudden quiet felt almost as uncomfortable as the constant news coverage. His phone rang again, the party chairperson, for the 5th time that day. Whitfield ignored it, just as he had ignored the 43 other calls. You need to respond, James, his wife said quietly. The longer you hide, the worse it looks. Whitfield glared at her. I'm not hiding. I'm planning. There's a difference. In truth, he had been avoiding reality. The video had been viewed over 15 million times. His social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. 3 major donors had publicly withdrawn their support, and still, Whitfield refused to accept that he was at fault. The doorbell rang, making both of them jump. His wife peeked through the curtains. It's Robert, she said. Should I let him in? Whitfield nodded reluctantly. His chief of staff was one of the few people he still trusted, though even Robert had sounded different on the phone lately, more distant, less confident in their strategy. Robert entered looking tired, his normally neat appearance showing signs of stress. He carried a thick folder and wore the expression of someone delivering bad news. We need to talk, Robert said, not bothering with pleasantries. The party leadership is meeting tonight to discuss your situation. They're considering asking you to step down. They can't force me out, Whitfield replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Robert opened his folder. We have 3 options. First, make a full apology, take responsibility, and announce you're seeking help for stress and personal issues. Whitfield scoffed. Absolutely not. Next. Second, claim the video was manipulated and that you're the victim of a political hit job. We got a tech expert who says he can cast doubt on the authenticity. Whitfield nodded slowly. That's more like it. What's the third option? Resign immediately and hope this blows over before any more damage is done to your reputation or the party's. The senator's face reddened. Resign? After everything I built? Not happening. 2 hours later, Whitfield sat before cameras in his home office, a carefully arranged bookshelf behind him. He had chosen option 2, attack and deny. My fellow citizens, he began, reading from the teleprompter, I come to you today as the victim of a coordinated attack on my character and reputation. The video being circulated has been doctored and manipulated to portray me in the worst possible light. As he spoke, his social media team posted supporting statements from 3 loyal staffers who claimed the senator had always shown respect to everyone regardless of race or background. I have always fought for fair treatment of all citizens, Whitfield continued, his voice gaining strength with each practiced line. This officer singled me out because of my stance on police budget reform, and now political opponents are using this manufactured incident to silence me. Across town, in a modest apartment, Jessica Martinez watched the senator's statement with growing disbelief. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from journalists seeking interviews and viewers thanking her for exposing the truth. He's actually denying it, she said to her roommate. The whole thing is on video, from multiple angles, and he's still lying. Meanwhile, more former Whitfield staffers began speaking out. A former speechwriter revealed how the senator had requested that certain words be removed from speeches when addressing predominantly black neighborhoods. A former driver described hearing similar language to what was captured in the video on multiple occasions. That evening, a political analyst on national television laid out the timeline. Senator Whitfield's approval rating has dropped 22 points in 3 days. 7 major donors have withdrawn support. His own party is distancing themselves, and still, he refuses to take responsibility. As night fell, Officer Marcus Johnson sat on his back porch, declining yet another interview request. His captain had offered him time off, but Johnson had refused. He wouldn't hide or change his routine because of what had happened. You did the right thing, his wife said, bringing him a cup of coffee. Johnson nodded, looking up at the stars. I know, just doing my job. Neither of them could have predicted how much bigger this story was about to become. The park outside City Hall bustled with activity as hundreds of people gathered, many holding handmade signs. Support Officer Johnson, read one. Character matters, declared another. The crowd grew larger by the minute, with people of all ages and backgrounds joining together. At the center of it all was Pastor Michael Williams, his powerful voice carrying across the crowd without a microphone. Today we stand for truth. Today we stand for respect. Today we stand with a man who showed us what real dignity looks like in the face of hatred. The crowd cheered, waving their signs higher. This was the 3rd such gathering in a week, each one larger than the last. What had begun as a shocking viral video had transformed into a movement about accountability and respect. Across town, Officer Marcus Johnson prepared for his shift just like any other day. Despite becoming the unexpected face of a national conversation, he maintained his routine and refused to call attention to himself. "You sure you don't want to take some time off?" asked his partner, Officer Rivera, as they checked their equipment. "No one would blame you." Johnson shook his head. "Best thing I can do right now is my job, same as always." As they walked toward their patrol car, other officers stopped to shake Johnson's hand or pat him on the back. His quiet professionalism had earned him newfound respect, even from colleagues who had barely noticed him before. The police chief had received over 2,000 emails and calls supporting Johnson, along with requests from 3 police departments in other states asking if Johnson would consider speaking to their officers about maintaining composure in difficult situations. Meanwhile, at Whitfield campaign headquarters, the mood couldn't have been more different. Half the desks sat empty, with several staffers having resigned in the past week. Those who remained worked phones with grim determination, trying to stem the tide of abandoning supporters. Robert stared at the latest polling numbers on his computer screen. The senator's approval rating had dropped another 8 points overnight, putting him underwater with voters for the first time in his career. "We've lost the Henderson endorsement," announced a young staffer, hanging up the phone. "That's the 4th one today." Robert nodded silently. The denials and attacks weren't working. If anything, they were making things worse as more evidence emerged contradicting the senator's claims. The local newspaper had published a devastating front-page article featuring interviews with 10 former Whitfield employees, all describing similar behavior to what was captured on video. The headline read, "PTERNFPREGUDICE. Staffers speak out against Senator Whitfield." Across social media, the hashtag Thank You Officer Johnson was trending nationwide. People shared stories of their own experiences with racism and praised Johnson's restraint and professionalism. Jessica Martinez, whose video had started it all, found herself becoming an unexpected voice for accountability. A national morning show had invited her to speak about why she decided to record and share the incident. "I just thought people deserved to see the truth," she explained simply. "Public figures should be judged by their actions, not just their words." By the afternoon, a group of business leaders from Senator Whitfield's largest donors had released a joint statement announcing they were withdrawing all financial support. "We cannot and will not support leadership that conflicts with our values of respect, integrity, and equal treatment for all citizens," the statement read. At the police station, Johnson returned from his shift to find a mountain of letters piled on his desk. Cards from school children, letters from citizens, notes from fellow officers around the country, all expressing gratitude and support. "What are you going to do with all this?" asked the desk sergeant, gesturing to the overflowing pile. Johnson smiled slightly. "Read every one of them, I guess." One letter in particular caught his eye. It was from an elderly black man who had served as a police officer in the 1960s. "In my day, no one would have cared how I was treated," the letter read. "Thank you for showing how far we've come, and how far we still have to go." That evening, as Johnson drove home, he passed the continuing rally at City Hall. The crowd had grown even larger, with candles now lit as darkness fell. He didn't stop. That wasn't his style, but he honked once in acknowledgement, bringing cheers from the gathered supporters. The movement that had formed around him wasn't just about one traffic stop or one racist politician. It had become something bigger. A community finding its voice and demanding better from its leaders. The fluorescent lights of the Ethics Committee hearing room cast harsh shadows as Senator James Whitfield sat alone at the witness table. 2 weeks had passed since the traffic stop video exploded across the nation, and things had only gotten worse for the once powerful politician. "Senator Whitfield," began Chairwoman Eleanor Martinez, her voice stern but controlled, "this committee is investigating not only the incident with Officer Johnson, but also numerous other allegations that have since come to light." Whitfield adjusted his tie nervously. His usual confidence had disappeared, replaced by a barely concealed anxiety. The half-empty room spoke volumes. Most of his allies had stopped appearing in public with him. "I maintain that this is a politically motivated witch hunt," Whitfield replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Chairwoman Martinez shuffled through a stack of papers. "Let's move on to the financial questions." Can you explain why 3 companies that received state contracts last year all made contributions to your personal foundation within 30 days of those contracts being awarded? Whitfield's face paled. This was not what he had prepared for. The traffic stop video had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and investigators were finding much more than just evidence of prejudice. Across town, investigative reporter Diana Chen sat in a coffee shop with a former Whitfield campaign finance director who had agreed to speak anonymously. It wasn't just the racism, the source explained quietly. That was just the tip of the iceberg. The foundation was basically a slush fund. Donors who wanted favors would contribute there instead of directly to the campaign. Chen scribbled notes rapidly. And where did that money go? Officially? Community projects. But those projects often hired companies owned by friends or family members. The books were cooked from top to bottom. What had begun as a story about one man's prejudice was revealing a complex web of corruption. 3 separate investigations were now underway: the Ethics Committee, the State Attorney General, and the Federal Election Commission. At the police station, Officer Marcus Johnson found himself unexpectedly involved in the widening scandal. Financial investigators had requested his help in understanding the timeline of events. We believe the senator may have attempted to use his foundation to improperly influence police department funding, explained investigator Sarah Patel. Your incident appears to be connected to a larger pattern. Johnson shook his head in disbelief. I was just writing a speeding ticket. Patel smiled slightly. Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. Meanwhile, Jessica Martinez had become something of a local celebrity. Her journalism professors had invited her to speak to classes about ethical reporting and citizen journalism. The video she captured had now been viewed over 40 million times worldwide. I never expected any of this, she told a group of student journalists. I just saw something wrong happening and felt like people should know. One student raised her hand. Are you worried about backlash from the senator's supporters? Jessica paused before answering. At first, yes, but for every angry message, I've received 100 supportive ones. The truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable. As the investigations deepened, more shocking details emerged. Financial records revealed that Whitfield had diverted campaign funds to pay for personal expenses. Text messages showed him pressuring officials to award contracts to donors. Former staffers testified about being asked to destroy documents and delete emails. The traffic stop that started it all now seemed almost minor compared to the corruption being uncovered. Yet it was that moment of unfiltered truth, when the senator revealed his real character, that had cracked open the facade. At home that evening, Officer Johnson watched the news with his family as new allegations against the senator dominated the headlines. "Daddy, are you famous now?" asked his 8-year-old daughter. Johnson smiled and shook his head. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who did his job." His wife squeezed his hand, knowing that his simple act of maintaining his professionalism had unleashed something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. As night fell, the lights still burned in the Ethics Committee offices. Investigators pored over documents, connecting dots between campaign contributions, legislative votes, and government contracts. What they were uncovering would soon rock the political establishment to its core. The senator who had once seemed untouchable was now watching his empire crumble piece by piece. And it had all begun with a routine traffic stop and a police officer who refused to be bullied or disrespected. A small moment of truth that opened the floodgates. 6 months had passed since that fateful traffic stop. On a crisp autumn morning, Senator James Whitfield stood alone on the steps of the state capitol building, facing a forest of microphones and cameras. His once confident posture was gone, replaced by the slumped shoulders of a defeated man. After much reflection and discussion with my family, he read from a prepared statement, his voice hollow. I am announcing my withdrawal from the upcoming election and my resignation from office, effective immediately. The crowd of reporters erupted with questions, but Whitfield raised his hand for silence. The events of the past months have made it impossible for me to serve effectively. While I maintain my innocence regarding certain allegations, I acknowledge that my behavior during the traffic stop with Officer Johnson was inexcusable and beneath the standards expected of public servants. With those words, the political career of Senator James Whitfield officially ended. No family members stood beside him. No loyal staffers offered support. The man who once commanded rooms with his presence now hurried away from the podium, ignoring shouted questions. Across town, Officer Marcus Johnson was doing what he had done throughout the entire ordeal, his job. He directed traffic outside an elementary school, high-fiving children as they crossed the street. If the parents recognized him as the officer from the famous video, they didn't mention it. That was exactly how Johnson preferred it. Later that afternoon, Police Chief Williams called Johnson into his office. "You've been selected for the Community Service Award," the chief announced. "The ceremony is next month." Johnson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "With all due respect, sir, I was just doing my job. Nothing special about that." Chief Williams leaned forward. "Marcus, what you showed that day wasn't just good policing. It was strength of character. You become a symbol of what's right about this department." After a moment's hesitation, Johnson nodded. "I'll be there, sir. Thank you." Meanwhile, the investigations into Whitfield's affairs had resulted in multiple indictments. 3 of his former business associates faced charges for financial fraud. His campaign manager had struck a plea deal in exchange for testimony about campaign finance violations. The well-crafted image Whitfield had maintained for years had been completely dismantled. In the wake of his resignation, something unexpected happened in local politics. Diane Reynolds, a respected community organizer with no previous political experience, announced her candidacy for Whitfield's empty seat. "We need leaders who truly represent all people," she declared at her campaign launch, with Officer Johnson's wife Tanya standing among her supporters. Leaders whose private actions match their public words. Jessica Martinez, now working as a full-time journalist for the local newspaper, covered the announcement. Her article highlighted Reynolds' platform of transparency and community policing reform, creating better relationships between officers and citizens. At the police station, Johnson had turned down numerous offers for promotions, book deals, and television appearances. What he did accept, however, was an opportunity to establish a mentorship program for young people interested in community service and law enforcement. "The Police Youth Partnership Program isn't about making more cops," Johnson explained to the first group of 30 teenagers gathered in the community center. "It's about building understanding between communities and the people who serve them." Among those teenagers was Jessica Martinez's younger brother, inspired by how one person's integrity had created real change. On a warm evening 6 months to the day after the infamous traffic stop, Officer Johnson received a letter. The return address showed it was from James Whitfield. Johnson opened it carefully, unsure what to expect. "Officer Johnson," the letter began, "I've written this letter a dozen times and torn it up each time. No words can undo what I said or how I acted. My behavior that day revealed truths about myself I had hidden away. While I have lost much, I have gained something valuable: clarity. I was wrong, not just about you, but about many things. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that you changed me. For that, I thank you." Johnson folded the letter and put it away. Some journeys of understanding came too late, but they still mattered. As the sun set over the city, the community that had been divided by one man's hateful words was now slowly healing, led by the quiet example of a police officer who had simply done his job with dignity. And in that simple act of professionalism, karma had found its perfect expression, revealing truth, demanding accountability, and ultimately making room for something better to grow.